Williams is frozen in a lab. It's always baseball. It is always baseball. Hitting Ted Williams' frozen head. The fuck is this? Looks like something out of Ed, Edd n Eddy. It's like a bunch of hamburger patties. Alright, let's check it out.
The body of Ted Williams is frozen in a highly secured cryonics lab so he can be brought back to life hundreds of years in the future. Ted Williams was a baseball hero, a war hero, and an American hero. He was such a hero, he was chosen to live twice. If you ask the scientists currently storing his frozen body, his life never actually ended. It is on pause, waiting for reanimation. But when Ted Williams is brought back to life in the future, will he even be happy about it? When Ted Williams passed away in 2002, it was a big deal. And when the public found out that he would be frozen in a lab to be cloned or revived in the future, it became an even bigger deal. And when multiple people close to Ted Williams claimed that he was tricked into agreeing to the procedure against his wishes, the story got even bigger. Then when an employee of Alcor claimed that the lab treated Ted Williams in criminal ways, including accidentally decapitating him, freezing his head to a tuna can, striking it repeatedly with a monkey wrench, and much more, the story got bigger. Then finally,
what is happening in baseball?
His own daughter came out and claimed that her brother had told her that he planned to freeze their father's body solely because he could sell his DNA to people who wanted to own Ted Williams' genes. The story was massive.
Oh my god, that's actually genius.
From remembering the life of the
like a prized horse.
Ted Williams to covering a
Ted Williams can inseminate
children who were literally fighting over his dead body.
This is incredible already. But isn't the idea just to freeze the brain? Like, if you can keep the brain okay and try and implant it somewhere else at some point, isn't that the idea of it?
Ted chose to have his body cryonically preserved.
Great baseball player Ted Williams' will was made public, clearly requests that he be cremated.
Talk to anyone on the street and say, Ted Williams, oh, is that the frozen guy? That's the sadness.
Ted, he became a punchline in death. This was something that I believe his son did, some kooky idea. And
sad, inglorious ending for the greatest hitter that ever lived.
He's a prime taco player.
It is not a stretch to say that Ted Williams is one of the most well-known, respected, and talented athletes in American sports history.
I don't know who he is.
If you ask any baseball fan who Ted Williams is, they will tell you, but a majority of them have never even seen him play. That's because when Ted Williams retired in 1960, he became a living legend and was treated like that for decades to come. During his career, he played in 19 All-Star games, won 2 MVP awards, 2 Triple Crowns, was the last hitter to finish a season batting over 400, and is widely considered the greatest hitter who ever lived.
I feel like every baseball player has that title.
He missed 3 years as a pilot.
I remember hearing that for Barry Bonds,
while serving in Korea, where he
Sammy Sosa, Babe Ruth,
earned an air medal, 2 gold stars, and nearly died when his plane was shot by an anti-aircraft cannon, forcing him to emergency land without a landing gear. So it is no surprise that when Ted Williams passed away in 2002, it was a big deal. Unfortunately, the focus of his death quickly shifted from honoring his career and legacy to questions about being frozen in hopes of being brought back to life in the future. And these questions only intensified as more strange, suspicious, and flat-out criminal details continued to come out for years to come. And with every new shocking detail that surfaced, people seemed to always blame the same person. And this person was loved by Ted Williams and was probably closer to Ted than anybody else in the world. During the final stages of his life, Ted Williams faced several major health issues. He battled a heart condition which required open heart surgery and suffered multiple strokes throughout the last decade of his life. He was no longer able to fully operate on his own, so his son, John Henry Williams, came to Ted's aid starting in 1991.
He's got a punchable face. He does not look like a good guy.
And eventually
early impressions.
Power of attorney. This is basically a legal agreement that allows somebody else to make decisions for you, meaning that by the end of Ted Williams' life, his son John Henry was in control of basically every decision he made. Ted Williams came extremely close to his son during the final years of his life, despite being frequently absent during his childhood. John Henry personally helped Ted Williams tremendously during his old age, and Ted loved him for it, and he made it publicly known. John Henry Williams seemingly stopped his entire life and moved across the country in order to care for his sick, aging father. When most people do this, they are praised for it. John Henry Williams was not. From even before Ted Williams' death up until John Henry's own early death, he was constantly accused of trying to suck every penny he could from his father. John Henry Williams is seen by many as a case of extreme nepotism. Perhaps the most obvious case of this was his own baseball career. In order to bond with his father and honor his legacy, John Henry Williams decided to start his professional baseball career
appreciate it. Thank you,
at
Pretzel.
33 years old, an idea that he says he got while watching the attacks on 9/11
Just enough
with
time.
his father on TV. So even though he never even played in college, Ted Williams convinced the Red Sox to sign his son to play for the rookie ball team at 33 years old. He played 2 games, went 0 for 6, and then injured his ribs. He would play another season the following year
Doing
for a
what if he
professional
missed every
independent
shot?
team, and he didn't put up the best stats.
Just tripped on the
Although
way
a
to the
little bizarre,
bullpen?
John Henry's short baseball career was nothing compared to the long list of harsh accusations that would eventually come out. They mostly surrounded his strange business tactics, weird methods of squeezing money from his father, and neglecting his dad's health so bad that the Department of Children and Families came to their home. The details of these accusations would eventually all come out via tell-all books, newspaper articles, and court documents that all stem from one decision: having his father's body frozen. According to John Henry and his sister Claudia, they convinced their father to agree to cryonics in the last years of his life, even though his official will says he wanted to be cremated. Immediately after
Well, he
his
didn't know
death,
about
Ted
freezing.
Williams was flown on a private jet to a cryonics facility in Scottsdale, Arizona to be preserved. Alcor is the name of this lab, and for good and very bad reasons, they are likely the most well-known cryonics lab in the world. As of
Whoa.
2019, they had 168 patients and 90 pets, including dogs, cats, turtles, and even chinchillas, frozen in large steel containers like this.
What?
Patients pay up to $200,000 depending on if they
Holy
wanted to
shit.
freeze just their heads or their entire bodies, all in hopes that one day in the future,
Thanks, you said
science
Granny.
will evolve enough to bring their bodies back to life. Mainstream scientists have not hesitated to constantly point out how bizarre and how unlikely this practice will ever be possible. To simplify the science behind this process, one scientist said it is like taking ground beef and turning it into a cow. The most common thought amongst most scientists is
Well.
that even if future science is able to take the cells of a dead person and reanimate them, the possibility that a company like Alcor could store the body well enough for that long of a time is extremely unlikely at best. However, this has not stopped some extremely respected scientists.
Yeah, it
from
seems
becoming
more like a
involved with
scam.
Alcor and
200
co-starting
grand and
studies
they just
surrounding
put you in an
cryonics,
ice
and most of their
bath.
members revolve back to the same logic. Even
That's
if
kinda what I'm
chances of
getting.
revival are low, it's better than being buried and having no chances at all. And this is what attracts a lot of members of the cryonics community. Make a large monetary
Prime
investment to
Springtime
a
and
company
resub
like
that one guy.
Alcor for the unlikely chance that one day you will become immortal. Alcor itself has been involved in several controversies and many lawsuits that have accused them of storing bodies without proper approval from patients, using unsafe
Prime
and
Cryptic.
unsanitary medical practices, and several Alcor members were even arrested in 1994 when a courier ruled that they had murdered a patient via injection in order to speed up the freezing process. However, a judge
What?
later ruled that there was no foul play in this death, and Alcor successfully sued for false arrest. And to be fair to Alcor, when you're in the business of taking bodies of people immediately after their death, often transporting them across the country to freeze and store their bodies with hope of bringing them back to life in the future, it doesn't matter what you do, you're probably going to be involved in some scandals. And Alcor definitely has been. However, none of them have even come close to the one that surrounded Ted Williams and their treatment of his body. The chief of operation at Alcor, Larry Johnson, had only worked there for less than a year, but according to him, what he learned during that time made him feel so guilty, he had no choice but to become a whistleblower. He would go on to accuse Alcor of dumping contaminated blood down sewer drains, conducting harmful
Oh my
experiments
God.
on dogs, and even killing multiple patients prematurely in order to speed up the freezing process.
What?
But
This
these
is like
accusations
actual
are only
Resident
minor
Evil
compared to
shit.
the ones that Larry Johnson would later expose in a tell-all book, which wasn't even released until after the trial concluded. Within days of his death, Ted Williams' first daughter, Bobby Jo, had already started the process of trying to get her father out of the cryonics lab and cremated, as she says were his final wishes. She entered a legal battle against her two half-siblings, John Henry and Claudia, who supported cryonics and were members themselves. According to Bobby Joe, John Henry had called her about a year before Ted Williams' death and told her that he planned to sign her dad up for cryonics. When Bobby Joe rejected this idea, he responded by saying, quote unquote, "But wouldn't it be neat to sell dad's DNA? There's lots of people who would pay big bucks to have little Ted Williamses running around." It seems absolutely ridiculous.
Ruthless
that John Henry
businessman
would actually freeze
right there.
his father for the sole reason to sell his DNA.
But that would be a lot of money. He would have been fucking
along with the
rich.
reports of missing DNA in the Alcor lab, people's minds began to go in some very dark places. What followed was a massive backlash.
Sports fans would
John
eat
Henry
that
by
shit up.
fans,
Literally, they would eat
reporters,
Ted Williams
people close
cum.
to Ted Williams,
No doubt.
and even his own family. Since
They
taking
would pay a
over the
lot
Ted
for
Williams
it.
business, John Henry had had several businesses fail, including a Ted Williams museum, a Ted Williams store located inside a mall, a marketing company, and a web hosting company called Hitter.net, which was highly criticized when Ted Williams was seen shamelessly plugging the company while being honored at the 1999 All-Star Game. There were rumors that John Henry had forcefully taken off Ted Williams' Red Sox cap and replaced it with a Hitter.net cap right before he stepped
That's
onto the field,
fucked.
and baseball purists around
Oh,
the country
God.
were furious. Although this probably never happened, 80-year-old Ted Williams wasn't exactly the typical internet user, so promoting his son's web hosting company seemed pretty ingenuous at the time. It seems like the only sustainable business John Henry had was selling his father's autograph, and he made a lot of enemies while doing this. Ted Williams' signature is known for being heavily counterfeited, and John Henry had no problem accusing people for selling fake autographs. Often, these signatures may have actually been real. He would only acknowledge Ted Williams' autographs that were authenticated by him, and many people in the industry had problems
What a
with this.
douchebag.
And they had problems with John Henry in general.
Holy
he was
shit.
even accused of bragging about being able to flawlessly copy his father's signature, and one store owner said he would bet his own life that John Henry had sold Ted Williams' autographs that he had signed himself. But as we'll later find out, signed memorabilia is not the worst thing that John Henry was accused of faking signatures on. One of Ted Williams' business associates claimed that Ted told him that he felt like a prisoner in his last years. A woman who worked in the household claimed that John Henry would force Ted to do autographs for hours, all just for money. Another family aide accused John Henry of underfeeding his father, forcing him to sign autographs, and not letting him leave the house, causing the Florida Department of Children and Families to investigate the matter. But when they got there, they didn't find anything wrong with how John Henry was treating his father. John Henry was obviously losing the public image battle when it came to the lawsuit, and his sister was doing everything she could to get her father out of Alcor, and she had a ton of support. She used a letter from 1991 and a will from 1996, both written by Ted Williams, clearly stating that he wanted to be cremated. John Underwood, who wrote 3 books with Ted Williams, publicly said he knew Ted wished to be cremated, and more information about Alcor came out as well.
So what does John Henry do now?
Given the body without ever getting any paperwork signed by
Now that
Williams
Ted Williams
himself,
isn't around
which
to
is
milk.
against their policy. And the only thing on record that proves Ted Williams agreed to cryonics was a piece of paper stained with
Oh, he's
oil,
dead.
which John Henry said he found in the trunk of his car. 2 of Ted Williams' healthcare assistants claim this paper was a complete fraud forged by John Henry. But even though the entire world and
I'm surprised he
everyone was
wasn't
against
selling,
John
like,
Henry and the idea of Ted Williams
cryogenics
being
next
frozen
to
in the
Ted
first
Williams.
place, there
Yeah,
was
that's a
some
good
reason
point.
to believe he
Selling
was telling
prime
the
real
truth.
estate, like,
Bobby
get
Jo,
frozen
the
next
daughter
to
of
Ted Williams.
trying to get him out of Alcor, had not actually seen her father in years leading up to his death, meaning that she never actually had a conversation about cryonics with him. She claims this is because John Henry had used his power of attorney to push her out of his life, and although the reasons for this separation is not entirely clear, Ted Williams had cut her out of his will, and it is pretty clear they did have a rocky relationship throughout the years. In fact, Ted Williams had a rocky relationship with all of his children throughout the years. Known for having a bad temper and being absent from his kids' lives while they were growing up, John Henry was definitely closer to Ted than any of his other kids, and perhaps anybody else in the world. Ted Williams seemed to trust him despite the many allegations against him and the many people who didn't like him. Al Cassidy, longtime Williams family friend and executor of Ted's estate, sided with John Henry and believed the note signed by Williams was genuine, and this is a big reason why the lawsuit was eventually settled. According to Bobby Jo, the lawsuit ended solely because it was costing her too much money. It cost her over $80,000 in legal fees. The case was settled out of court, and it was decided the body would stay in Alcor under the condition that John Henry would never sell his father's DNA. However, the conflict was far from over. In 2004, John Henry Williams unexpectedly passed away from leukemia. His sister's husband spoke on her behalf saying, quote unquote, "He's a liar, a thief, a cheat. And the Bible says, honor your father and you will live long." Well, John Henry didn't honor his father and God came calling. So
Wow.
It is pretty obvious that the family was not on the greatest terms at this time. Shortly after that, another lawsuit was made against Alcor in attempts to get Ted Williams out of the facility. And shortly after that, a tell-all book written by former Alcor Chief Operating Officer Larry Johnson detailing some of the craziest details of Ted Williams' freezing was released. According to the book, he was taken to Alcor without any signature from Ted Williams and was accidentally decapitated even though the Williams family requested that he be frozen in one piece. Dozens of people came
Accidentally
to the facility to take
decapitated.
pictures with Ted Williams.
They brought in
and
a
see the
Redditor with a
procedure.
katana.
His head was frozen to a tuna can, and while trying to transport the head to a new storage unit, an employee struck the head twice with a wrench trying to dislodge the tuna can. Many samples of Williams'
God.
DNA went missing, and Alcor employees even joked about putting the DNA on eBay or sending it in a package to the Williams family because they hadn't paid their full bill yet. And the
Holy
second lawsuit
shit.
was also dismissed from court because of the agreements made during the first lawsuit prohibiting Bobby Joe from raising the issue
Thanks,
again.
Resub Tinky.
So whether you like it or not, that's where Ted Williams is today, frozen in a steel cylinder, waiting to be reanimated so he can once again play baseball for the Boston Red Sox.
Imagine it works, though. Like, 10 years from now. It's extremely quick, but 10 years from now, they just bring Ted Williams back. He's got, like, superpowers, like Dr. Manhattan, but only with baseball. Just starts fucking de-atomizing the other team. That was wild. Baseball has the craziest fucking stories, man. Holy shit. Wouldn't he still be old? No, they could just take his old head and glue it onto a young body. No one said it needs to be, like, consistent, right? It'd be fine. And maybe the young body, like, stem cells will start to, like, de-age his old head. Yeah, I can't stand that album at all, Violet. I think it sucks. Alcor is still operating and will freeze you for $6,000 or $25 a month. $25 a month? That's extremely cheap for cryogenics, it sounds like. Didn't they say 200 grand? Life Extension Foundation. Yep, you're right. Wow. Thanks, Resub Trick Solo. Have you seen Marriage Proposal Gone Wrong at Surlier? Thanks, Resub Yogurt.